Hi everyone, my name is Ron Torres and I've been asked by Bryant Stratton College to put together this brief video on the best practices for engaging online students. So let's start out together by defining what it means to engage online students. Let's start by saying that we need to go beyond the college's basic requirements, and that's a theme that you're going to see carried through each of the other elements of engaging online students. As instructors, well, we have to get to know our students. We have to be accessible and respond in a timely manner. We have to provide substantive feedback and positive critique. Being online, we have to know our classroom mechanics. And probably most importantly, we need to inject some fun into the classroom. So let's dive right in and talk a little bit about going beyond the college's requirements. Now, the design of each course supports the basic interaction to engage students in active learning. But it's a lot like that ice cream cone there. It's only got one flavor, and it's vanilla. What I hope to do by the end of this video is to show you some techniques and some examples of how we can go beyond the college's requirements and add flavor to each of our classrooms. Let's dive into that with the topic of getting to know your students. Now, the design of our course says that student introductions are mandatory in week 1, and we're required to personally respond to each student. But we need to go beyond that and capture some of that information. So in week 1, you'll have your icebreaker forum, and that's where our students will be posting their responses to the icebreaker. To go beyond the college requirements, well, you need to capture the programs that the students are in, maybe some specific interests, identify potential issues, and definitely find out what they personally like to be called. My name is formally Ronald Torres, but my mother only ever calls me that when she's very angry. I go by the name of Ron. And as an instructor, I need to know what my students like to be called. And what you might need to do is to manage your own personal class roster or grading sheet to capture that information and use highlighting to identify those potential issues. Now, getting to know your students expands out into creating a welcoming and safe learning environment. A large part of that is laying out the ground rules, but doing so in a manner that doesn't cause students to cringe at the thought of needing to contact you. And we want to avoid intimidating students from the onset of class. In other words, we need to lose harshness and negative instructions. As for laying out the ground rules, those are captured in our introductory folder documents and more specifically in the supplemental syllabus. It's there where we'll outline our teaching approach, our late policy, and our virtual office hours. And all of this is reinforced with an introductory folder quiz so that we know students are actually reviewing the material and understanding it. But to go beyond these basic college requirements, we can create even a more comfortable environment by responding, "Welcome to class," adding a personal note, including follow-up questions. Let's get them engaged in a dialogue right here in week 1. And I like to follow that up with, if you ever have any questions, and again, providing my contact information right there in my response posting. That leads us into the next topic, being accessible. By design, we all have virtual office hours, but unfortunately, at least in my experience, these are very rarely attended by students. No one simply drops on in. Even if students aren't attending the virtual office hour, I know where they are. They're in the classroom. And I need to be in the classroom too, and I need to be active. Now, the college asks us to have a teaching presence at least 5 days a week. I sometimes usually go beyond that, and I'm in classroom 6 or even 7 days a week. One of the techniques I like to use is something I call bring them down to zeros. And that's where I'm in the task pane and I go to the task tab, and there I'll see all my outstanding activities that need to be graded or discussion postings that need a response. And what I'll do is I'll play that little game and use this technique, bring them down to zeros. And nowadays, being accessible means being connected via a smartphone. And I suggest that you configure your Outlook email to your smartphone. Now, I'll receive emails from my students all times of day, and I can alleviate a multitude of student frustrations simply by responding to them, if not with an answer, then with an expectation of when an answer will be provided. And that'll move us into our next topic about providing feedback. To be valuable, feedback must be timely, and we're asked to respond to questions, whether they're in a discussion forum or email, within 24 to 48 hours, and that grades are due the Thursday after the grading period. Now, with that bring them down to zeros technique that I demonstrated in the previous slide, well, I'm doing just that. I'm responding quickly and often completing grades long before that Thursday after a grading period. Our feedback must also be substantive, and for that, let's use our rubrics. There we have clearly defined standards. And what I like to do is teach my students how to evaluate their own work using these rubrics before they submit it. That way, they know what my expectations are of their performance. And here's another opportunity to use your personalized grading sheets to make your feedback that much more relevant by putting it in the context of their target career or their current interests. And lastly, our feedback still needs to be positive, and for that I'll go back to the Oreo cookie approach, starting out with something positive, adding the negative or the corrections that need to happen, and then finishing off with something even more positive. It's a great approach. Now, providing feedback is one topic, but I like to go beyond the college's expectations and be proactive and try to avoid known issues. One way to do this even before class begins is to load your questions form full of FAQs with those lessons that you've learned having taught the course previously. And we know that time management is of particular concern with online students. So I would suggest, and what I do in my classes is, I load up the calendar function in Angel with the dates and descriptions from the tracking calendar and supplemental syllabus, and then I train my students on how to use the calendar and even add it to their course landing page. What a great way to support them with time management. And once class is underway, I load my discussion forums with things I call homework help and additional topics. This allows me to share known issues that students have had in previous classes with this current class. Let's move on to our next topic about knowing the classroom mechanics, and this is so important for online instructors. Now, I'm sure everybody's very familiar with announcements and how to configure them on your course landing page. And throughout the course, I'll use that mechanism in order to post those things that I want students to be aware of. But by their very nature, announcements are passive. I don't really know if students have actually read them. Now, we have a different mechanism we can use that are alerts and messages that go one step further. It begins in the Automation tab of your course. There you can configure alerts, which are simple text messages that can be displayed upon course entry that have to be acknowledged before you actually get into the course itself. So I know the student has seen it and had to acknowledge it before moving on. And messages are very similar, but we can be a little more fancy about their content and how we can create them. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, one of the most important things we need to add to our classrooms is an element of fun. And a simple way to achieve this is to be social. Why don't you load your discussion forum with a social posting or two, maybe just to start a discussion about your favorite movie or something that you love. Now, I don't count these as part of the formal discussion grade, but it's an opportunity for students to get together in a social setting. Now, being online, we have a lot of competition from a lot of other websites, and text can be boring. So to have fun, introduce graphics and even more graphics. Let me show you how I do that in my classrooms. The first example, well, that's what you're doing right now. You're reviewing a video, and I'll create YouTube videos for each week of my class. Welcome to Week X. And there I'll introduce the different topics and the different assignments to make sure that things are clear for my more visual learners. And look around your classroom for opportunity to introduce JPEGs and bitmaps. Look at these boring discussion headers. In the first weeks of a course, I'll ask students to send me mugshots and pictures of themselves, and I'll incorporate those all around the classroom right here in the discussion headers. And I reuse all the pictures that my students send me, along with an animated GIF tool, in order to create a class gallery that I'll post in the About This section portion of my classroom. Let's face it, students, like all of us, like to see themselves. Now, with all of these different mechanisms, I advise you to get some of your own feedback. And I do this with a Week 3 non-graded course content survey that I ask all my students, and here's an example of the kinds of questions that I ask and the responses that I get back from them. I know that the course materials are clear, but that not everybody wants to partake in pictures in creating a more social environment. I know that a majority of the class is getting some benefit out of the videos and helping them understand the course and the various topics, and that even with all of my efforts around the course calendar, a number of students are still not using it. I know that these additional discussion postings are contributing to their learning, and that all those additional topics are a good way for them to participate and learn. And I'm sure this percentage went up after Week 3, but at that time not many of the students had used the homework help discussion thread. I also find that students believe me to be responsive to their additional questions, and then I ask them something reflective, and nearly half the class believe they should be more active. So a survey like this helps me understand what's effective and how to tune my different mechanisms. So let's finish this video where we started, our desire to engage online students. It's all about adding additional flavors to our classroom to achieve specific results. So the college does a great job of setting up the basic requirements, but we need to go beyond those. We need to go beyond those in the areas of getting to know our students. To engage students, we need to be accessible and respond in a timely manner. We need to provide substantive feedback and give positive critique. To facilitate all of these, we have to know our classroom mechanics. And lastly, and most importantly, we need to create a social environment and inject some fun into each of our classrooms. Well, I'd like to thank you all for spending this time with me and learning a few of the best practices of engaging our online students. Thank you.